Hello everyone, my name is Melissa Desai and my political philosopher is John Rawls. John Rawls was born in 1921 in Baltimore, Maryland. His father, William Lee Rawls, was a prominent lawyer, and his mother, Anna Abel Stump Rawls, was a chapter president of the League of Women Voters. Two of his brothers died in childhood because they had contracted fatal illnesses from John. In 1928, John Rawls contracted diphtheria, and his younger brother Bobby visited him in his room and was fatally infected. The next winter, Rawls contracted pneumonia. Another younger brother, Tommy, caught the illness from John and died. Rawls studied at Princeton, where he was influenced by Wittgenstein's student Norman Malcolm, and at Oxford, where he worked with H.L.A. Hart, Isaiah Berlin, and Stuart Hampshire. As a college student, Rawls wrote an intensely religious senior thesis and had considered studying for the priesthood. Rawls lost his Christian faith when he joined the army as an infantryman in World War II on seeing the capriciousness of death in combat and learning of the horrors of the Holocaust. Rawls marries Margaret Warfield Fox in 1949. They had 4 children: Anne Warfield, Robert Lee, Alexander Emery, and Elizabeth Fox. In the 1960s, Rawls spoke out against America's military actions in Vietnam. The Vietnam conflict impelled Rawls to analyze the defects in the American political system that led it to prosecute so ruthlessly what he saw as an unjust war, and to consider how citizens could conscientiously resist their government's aggressive policies. In 1995, he suffered the first of several strokes, severely impeding his ability to continue to work. Rawls died on November 24, 2002, and is buried at the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Massachusetts. He was survived by his wife, their 4 children, and 4 grandchildren. Now I will be moving over to PowerPoint to further discuss John Rawls. John Rawls was an American political philosopher in the liberal tradition. He wrote a series of highly influential articles in the 1950s and 60s that helped refocus Anglo-American moral and political philosophy on substantive problems. His theory of justice as fairness describes a society of free citizens holding equal basic rights and cooperating within an egalitarian economic system. His theory of political liberalism describes the legitimate use of political power in a democracy and envisions how civic unity might endure despite the diversity of worldviews that free institutions allow. His writings on the law of peoples set out a liberal foreign policy that aims to create a permanently peaceful and tolerant international order. Rawls' most discussed work is his theory of a just liberal society called Justice as Fairness. Rawls first set out justice as fairness in systematic detail in his 1971 book, A Theory of Justice. Rawls continued to rework justice as fairness throughout his life, restating the theory in Political Liberalism, written in 1993, The Law of Peoples, written in 1999, and finally Justice as Fairness, written in 2001. There are 2 principles Rawls holds on justice as fairness. The first principle is that each person has the same invincible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. The second principle is that social and economic inequalities are to satisfy 2 conditions. They are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. They are to be the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society, the difference principle. Rawls sees political philosophy as fulfilling at least 4 roles in a society's public life. The first role is practical. Practical philosophy can discover grounds for reasoned agreement in a society where sharp divisions threaten to lead to conflict. A second role of political philosophy is to help citizens to orient themselves within their own social world. A third role is to probe the limits of practicable political possibility. Political philosophy must describe workable political arrangements that can gain support from real people. Yet within these limits, philosophy can be utopian. It can depict a social order that is the best that we can hope for. A fourth role of political philosophy is reconciliation, to calm our frustration and rage against our society and its history by showing us the way in which its institutions are rational and developed over time as they did to attain their present rational form. Rawls holds the need to impose a unified law on a diverse citizenry raises two fundamental challenges. The first is the challenge of legitimacy, the legitimate use of coercive political power. The second challenge is the challenge of stability, which looks at political power from the receiving end. Rawls describes the main ideas motivating his law of peoples as follows. The great evils of human history, unjust war and oppression, religious persecution, and the denial of liberty and conscience, starvation and poverty, and not to mention genocide and mass murder, follow from political injustice with its own cruelties and callousness. Once the gravest forms of political justice are eliminated by following just or at least decent social policies and establishing just or at least decent basic institutions, these great evils will eventually disappear. As a liberal society has a basic structure of institutions, so Rawls says there is an international basic structure. Rawls puts forward 8 principles for ordering the international basic structure. Peoples are free and independent, and their free and independence are to be respected by other peoples. Peoples are to observe treaties and undertakings. Peoples are equal and are parties to the agreements that bind them. Peoples are to observe the duty of non-intervention, except to address grave violations of human rights. Peoples have a right of self-defense, but no right to instigate war for reasons other than self-defense. Peoples are to honor human rights. Peoples are to observe certain specified restrictions in the conduct of war. Peoples have a duty to assist other peoples living under unfavorable conditions that prevent their having a just or decent political and social regime. Rawls admired Immanuel Kant's moral philosophy. By insisting, as against utilitarianism, on the separateness of persons, Rawls carries on Kant's theme of respect for persons. The actors in Rawls' international theory are not individuals, citizens, but societies, peoples. A people is a group of individuals ruled by a common government, bound together by common sympathies, and firmly attached to a common conception of right and justice. People is a moralized concept. Rawls' conception of peoples within the law of peoples parallels his conception of citizens within justice as fairness. Rawls describes the fundamental interests of a people as follows: protecting its political independence, its territory, and the security of its citizens, maintaining its political and social institutions and its civic culture, securing its proper self-respect as a people, which rests on its citizens' awareness of its history and cultural accomplishments. In my understanding of John Rawls, I believe he might address the American contemporary issue of diversity, multiculturalism, by saying that all people are equal and deserve to be treated with the same equality and freedom as the person next to him. Thank you for viewing my presentation on John Rawls.